Hi, I'm Lloyd Pye. For the past 13 years, I've worked with doctors, geneticists, and other scientific experts trying to solve one of the world's great mysteries. The Starchild skull is an actual bone skull that has virtually nothing in common with a human skull. Our goal has been to answer two astonishing questions about it. What on earth is the Starchild skull? Is it even from Earth? Our answers are in two related videos. In this one, I'll discuss answers from anonymous internet trolls, supercilious Wikipedia editors, and even a few misguided experts, all of whom suggest several conditions they believe could cause a human skull to be extensively malformed into the Starchild. Each of their explanations has been discounted by numerous experts who, unlike internet critics, have personally examined the Starchild skull. Indeed, this video presents compelling evidence against their weak attempts to explain away the Starchild's dozens of unique physical and genetic traits. This is so easy to understand, even the proverbial caveman can do it. First, some background. The Starchild skull was discovered in 1930 in a mine tunnel in the Copper Canyon region of northwest Mexico. It was found with a human female skull we used for comparison. Carbon-14 testing has revealed that both died about 900 years ago. The Starchild skull is so extensively different from a normal human skull, both physically and genetically, that it must at least be considered a new species and potentially even an extraterrestrial alien. Such a radical challenge to current scientific dogma will surely set mainstream hair on fire. However, in the two videos I mentioned, we do present the extraordinary proof they demand. This video discusses their most persistent criticisms of the Starchild skull, and you can decide if they're well-founded. First up is the mainstream's default explanation that genetic variations can create any combination of defects or deformities. In other words, anything is possible, which technically is true. However, what they fail to mention is that extensive genetic variations are always fatal shortly after conception. From partial recoveries of the Starchild's DNA, we already know its genome contains vastly more genetic variations than any human could conceivably survive. Therefore, anything is not possible. Apart from the mainstream's erroneous default explanation for the Starchild's wide array of physical and genetic differences, the three they suggest most often are cradleboarding, hydrocephaly, and progeria. Cradleboarding was a widespread practice in primitive cultures around the world. Infants would be swaddled and strapped onto a board carried on their mother's back. The infant's head was kept immobile to protect its weak neck while mom did her work. Resting against the board gradually deformed the skull's soft bones until the rear was as flat as the board. The human female found with the Starchild exemplifies cradleboarding. Her skull's rear is bored flat from its upper crown to just above the inion, the knob of bone at the lower rear of every human's head, where neck muscles attach to the skull. In contrast, the Starchild skull has no inion, and it has a much larger area of flattening. However, that flattening is not artificial, because all of the bone's natural convolutions are clearly visible. In addition, if the Starchild had ever been cradleboarded, the angle of downward tilt would be so extreme it would choke to death in a matter of minutes, rather than dying as an adult, which it did. Therefore, natural convolutions plus no death in infancy equals the Starchild was not cradleboarded. This equation is so clear and simple, a caveman can understand it. Dr. Ted Robinson, a certified cranial expert, is on record as understanding it. Yet anonymous bloggers, internet trolls, and Wikipedia editors can't quite wrap their melon heads around it. The mainstream's second knee-jerk explanation is that the bulging parietal bones at the sides of the Starchild's head must be caused by hydrocephaly, a condition that causes a skull to expand like a balloon due to excess spinal fluid collecting in or around the brain. The first places to expand are the suture lines, the disconnected edges of the bone plates that normally close in the first 2 years of life to fit together like puzzle pieces. The Starchild suture lines are joined normally, with no sign of outward expansion, which by itself rules out hydrocephaly. However, notice the crease where a three-way suture junction actually dips inward. Try blowing up a balloon while leaving a crease on its surface. You can't do it, and neither could it occur in the Starchild skull. Again, no hydrocephaly. This is the inner area of the suture junction under discussion. For a skull crease to form at this junction, the whole area would have to be fused into one piece, yet glimpses of light in several places leave no doubt it was not fused. In fact, a standard CAT scan of the Starchild skull proves that none of its cranial sutures were abnormally fused. Unfused suture lines plus an inward crease equals the Starchild skull did not have hydrocephaly. A caveman can understand this. Dr. John Baczynski, a radiology expert, can understand this. But internet bloggers and trolls and those pesky Wikipedia geniuses just can't quite manage to grasp it. The most recent favorite among skeptics attempting to explain away the Starchild is progeria, a very complex condition that makes infants grow old at a highly accelerated rate. As children, they are literally old. As teenagers, they are ancient. Organs become debilitated, bones become thin and brittle, and it is always prematurely fatal. Some of the Starchild's projected facial features, such as its greatly reduced lower face, are similar to those expressed in progeria. However, in comparison with an actual progeria victim, the Starchild skull can't be aligned to create an approximate match. The differences are too extensive. Despite the obvious skeletal ravages of progeria, its victims always have human skulls, which the Starchild clearly does not have. What the Starchild does exhibit is progeria's symptom of thin bone. However, progeria greatly weakens bones as it thins them out, whereas the Starchild's thin bone is hard to an extraordinary degree. In fact, the Starchild's bone is biochemically constructed more like human tooth enamel, the hardest part of our bodies. One final powerful piece of evidence is that in progeria victims, the fontanelle, the soft spot at the top of the head, nearly always remains open until death, while the Starchild's is clearly closed. Progeria's high degree of complexity and fundamental strangeness makes it easy for internet trolls and Wikipedia hucksters to blind the unsuspecting with glib BS. However, even a tiny amount of objective research reveals their devious and ongoing intellectual scam. So, yet again, extremely hard bone plus a closed fontanelle equals the Starchild did not have progeria. And, yet again, a caveman can understand this. And, yet again, a certified expert understands it. And, as always, despite abundant evidence contrary to Wikipedia's position on it, their genius editors remain certain they know better. Well-meaning people often tell me they have it on good authority that the Starchild is 100% human. That absurdity is widely dispersed on the internet and is based on a DNA test carried out in 1999 at a forensic teaching laboratory by a group of student geneticists who concluded the Starchild was a human male. To say this plainly, 1999 was the Stone Age of DNA testing, and those students badly botched the job. 4 years later, in 2003, their answer was conclusively proven wrong by a new round of DNA testing that concluded the Starchild carried DNA from a human female, but had no genetic connection with a human male. We assumed that meant it was a hybrid, with a human mother and a non-human father. That held true until 2010 and 2011, when new rounds of DNA testing used sophisticated, state-of-the-art sequencing technology to overturn the 2003 results. Next-generation equipment produced 3 partial DNA results that convincingly indicate the Starchild is not the human male from the botched 1999 test, nor the human-non-human hybrid of 2003. Because DNA analysis can be such a complex, complicated subject, critics, skeptics, and trolls love trying to deflate the Starchild's case with Occam's razor, which suggests that the simplest solution they can think of, no matter how it goes against compelling evidence, should automatically be considered correct. But they forget that razors can, and often do, cut both ways. The Starchild's solution is not simple, and those who say it is are wrong. It did not miraculously survive massive DNA disruptions that would kill any human shortly after conception. Its head was not cradle-boarded, it did not suffer from hydrocephaly, brachycephaly, Crouzon's disease, Apert syndrome, or any other congenital defect, and it clearly did not suffer from progeria. To suggest the Starchild had any of these disorders is beyond simply being wrong. It is clinging to malicious, willful ignorance of easily available facts that any responsible researcher would have no trouble finding. Finally, let me conclude with a brief discussion about research funding. Many people ask why we need 7 figures to sequence the Starchild's genome. They've heard that human genomes can now be sequenced for only a few $1,000s. That is true, but it involves sequencing the DNA of a living person when all parts of the genome are intact, like long strings of Christmas lights. When sequencing DNA older than 50 years, very special techniques are required because the DNA is degraded into small, broken segments and contaminated by bacteria. Imagine the previously mentioned strings of Christmas lights after a trip through a wood chipper. Therefore, the Starchild's 900-year-old DNA requires analysis that is extremely sophisticated and much more expensive. In the past 13 years, everything we've learned about the Starchild Skull strongly indicates it is not human. Ultimately, we will secure the means to prove that assertion, and when we do, it will be a pivotal milestone in human history. If you'd like to play a role in making that happen, you can help us spread the information presented in this and the other 2 videos as far and as wide as possible, so we can connect with someone who has the financial means and a personal desire to join us proving that humans are not alone in the universe, and we never have been.